Hello everyone, I'm Ankur Chaudhary from Hitbullseye.com, and in this video I'll be explaining a little bit about economic planning in India, its various components, a bit of its historical background and its current context. So let's understand how economic planning in India came about. So Planning Commission was an extra constitutional body and non-statutory body which was set up in the year 1950. The word extra constitutional means that there are no provisions provided for the establishment of a body like Planning Commission, and it is a non-statutory body. This means that there was no law passed by the Union Parliament to set up this body. For example, we have the RBI Act, the SEBI Act. So any body that is established by a specific law or act, that is called a statutory body. However, for Planning Commission, no provisions were made in the constitution, or neither any law was passed. So Planning Commission performed the following functions. It formulated an integrated 5-year plan for economic and social development. So it was a recommendatory body, right, which was responsible to formulate the 5-year plans for Indian economy. The objective of this 5-year planning was to ensure effective and balanced utilization of country's resources. So it would be responsible for allocating certain funds to various states, to various projects, to various government schemes, etc. Right? So the planning, as far as the Planning Commission is concerned, the Prime Minister of India was, right, since the Planning Commission has been abolished by the new government, so Prime Minister of India was the ex officio chairperson of the Planning Commission. So a question that has been asked in the previous year paper. Let us take a look at one such question. From which country did India borrow the concept of economic planning? Russia or erstwhile USSR is the correct answer. However, there was one major difference between USSR and India's concept of planning. USSR's as you would remember from one of the previous video lectures, USSR was a communist society, right? So model of planning that they adopted was highly regimental. However, India adopted an indicative model of planning. That is, the planning targets for erstwhile USSR were very strict and they had to be followed. However, in case of India, these targets given in the 5-year plans were indicative or merely guidelines and not necessarily binding on various state and union governments. So let us take an overview of the targets fixed for economic growth in various 5-year plans along with the actual rates that were achieved. So this is a table that depicts these data. So you would see, if you look at it carefully, there are certain gaps, like one we have of 3 years between the 3rd and the 4th year plan, that is the year 1966 to 1969. And as far as 5th plan is concerned, this is 78. So as far as the 5th plan is concerned, there was a gap of 2 years between 1978 and 1980. And then further moving on, we had another gap of 2 years between 1990 and 1992. So over here, we had what is called annual plans. Annual plans. So the concept of 5-year plan was abandoned for some time because we saw 2 major wars that India had to face, first against China in 1962 and then against Pakistan in 1965. Because of this, a lot of financial resources were diverted towards our war effort. So that is why the targets fixed in the 3rd plan were abandoned for some point in time. So that is why we had targets only for 1 year and we had 3 such years back to back. As far as the 5th plan is concerned, this was a period of political instability and turmoil in the country. So this is when Indira Gandhi was defeated and a first non-Congress government was formed at the center led by the Janata Party. So Janata Party had new visions of development for the country. they abandoned the idea of 5-year plans. However, they introduced a new concept, that is of rolling plans. An annual plan would be formulated and it would automatically roll over to the next year. So this was 2 years of rolling plans that we saw. However, this was discontinued in 1980 as the Janata Party government was defeated and Indira Gandhi came back as the Prime Minister with a resounding majority. So the 5-year plan came back into the Indian economy. Next, we have the period between 1990 and 1992. So over here, the Indian economy faced a huge balance of payment crisis. Our forex reserves were down to an all-time low. So due to that reason, we again abandoned the 5-year plan, and for 2 years again we had annual plans. So we'll be talking about this balance of payment crisis later in the presentation. So currently we are in the 12th 5-year plan, and these are the targets for this particular plan. This period is of course 2012 to 2017. Let us take a look at another question before we move on. So which of the following is associated with the 12th 5-year plan? Plan with the human face. So these are nothing but the mottos or slogans of different 5-year plans. So plan with the human face, Garibi Hatao, faster and more inclusive growth, faster, sustainable and more inclusive growth. So the answer for this particular question is faster, sustainable and more inclusive growth. As far as talking about the other options that we saw, plan with the human face, this is from the 8th 5-year plan, right? Garibi Hatao, the slogan given by our Prime Minister, Ms. Indira Gandhi, was associated with the 6th 5-year plan of 1980s. Faster and more inclusive growth was the slogan from the previous plan, that is 11th 5-year plan. So the Indian planning history can be divided into two parts. One, that is pre-reforms, that is reforms of 1991, LPG reforms. Again, I'll be talking about them a little later, and the plans which have existed after the 1991 reforms. So as far as pre-reform planning is concerned, there are two plans which are very important for your examinations point of view. The second 5-year plan, that is from 1956 to 1961, this period can be called as the period in which planning in India actually took place. The first plan, that is before this, had a very minimal budgetary allocation and it was just a starting point. So the actual strategic planning started as far as India is concerned in the second 5-year plan. So it was based on the Mahalanobis model. Mahalanobis was a very famous statistician and also known as the father of Indian planning. This particular model suggested that planning in India should focus on heavy and basic industries. Now, you might be knowing that when we got independence, we were a very poor country and most of the population, almost 95 to 99% of our population, was involved only in agriculture. So agriculture was a very low productive job. Secondly, there was a lot of employment, a lot of people already involved in the agricultural field, right, and were very poor. So Mahalanobis suggested that rather than targeting poverty at this point in time, wherein most of the country would be the beneficiaries, it would be wise to focus right now on heavy and basic industries like textile, steel, etc., paper as well, so that when these industries develop, the demand of the products produced by these farmers, that increases, and naturally the income of these farmers also increase. So it adopted a trickle-down strategy of development. So when you talk about trickle-down strategy, on the bottom rather, we have the Indian farmers, which constituted, as I said, almost 95 to 99% of our population. On the top, he conceptualized were the heavy industries, right? So he said that rather than focusing on farmers, right, so if we do this, then it would be very difficult to ensure economic growth in the country. So Mahalanobis suggested that we should focus on developing heavy industries like textile, paper, steel, etc. When this happens, then the demand for the products produced by our farmers will increase. Their incomes will also increase, right? So by focusing on the top, the growth will in fact trickle down from top to the bottom. So this is the basic idea behind the trickle down theory. So next we talk about the fifth five-year plan from 74 to 1978. So during the 1970s, it was realized that the trickle down strategy proposed in the second five-year plan was not really working. What was happening as a result was there was a huge concentration of wealth on the top, right? And the benefits were not really trickling down to the farmers. So in this plan, we saw a huge strategic shift of Indian economy, and the focus now became removal of poverty, right? But this plan, as I spoke about earlier, was suspended prematurely in 1978. So not much could be achieved in the fifth five-year plan. However, it is important that the poverty was understood to be the biggest problem in India only in the fifth five-year plan. So the second five-year plan and the fifth five-year plan are very important as far as pre-reform planning is concerned. So moving on to the post-reform planning period. So by the end of the 1980s, the government's debt became very high. Now you may be remembering that before 1991, most of the industries were government controlled. However, these industries were highly susceptible to corruption, firstly, and secondly, they were very inefficient because they were government run. So due to this reason, their losses sort of piled on and government debt became very high as these companies were not generating profits, right? So the government's debt went high. Now when your debt is high, you cannot take more loans from other bodies, right? So it became very difficult for India to borrow funds from organizations like World Bank and the IMF. So as a result, World Bank and IMF suggested that India should reform its economic structure to get more loans, because they felt that if India still does not reform and they still end up giving us loans, it will be very unlikely that India will be able to pay these loans back. So eighth five-year plan is historical in the sense that it introduced three major reforms: liberalization, privatization and globalization. So there was a shift from induced to indicative planning. So in this, earlier the government never incentivized the private sector to be getting or investing in certain industries. However, in indicative planning approach, government takes the private sector as its partner and introduces certain benefits like tax incentives to invest in certain industries, right? So we saw a shift from induced to indicative planning. Again, the emphasis changed to human capital and infrastructure development. So the government realized that even though India has a huge population, right, but a lot of Indians were not highly skilled. So they tried to develop human resources by establishing various engineering colleges, medical colleges and other institutions, and also focused on more investments in development of infrastructure like power, railways, roads, etc. Right? So that is why it is called a plan with a human face. Later and more importantly, increasing role was assigned to the private sector. So earlier the government sector enjoyed a monopoly over a large number of industries. But after eighth five-year plan, only 6 industries were left to the monopoly of the government. In all other industries, private companies could invest and work in. So let's now try and understand what induced the government to make such far-reaching reforms. So first, we had the balance of payment crisis of 1991. So as I said earlier, the government debt was rising. So we went out to get loans from IMF and World Bank. However, these loans were rejected. Then we were forced to reform our economic structure. So these reforms were initiated in 1991, July of 1991, and it introduced these following far-reaching changes. Delicensing. Now earlier, if I was a businessman and I wanted to set up a company or set up a factory to, let us say, manufacture coats, so I had to take permissions from the government. Later, if I wanted to increase my capacity, so for example, if I'm producing 100 coats today in a day, and if I wanted to increase my capacity to producing 200 coats in a day, I had to take another license or a permission for the government. And thirdly, if today I'm producing only coats and tomorrow I plan to produce trousers as well, again I had to take a license from the government. However, this particular process of over-regulation was thought to be discouraging to the private sector. So these licenses were, or so many permissions were removed from the manufacturing sector. Deregulation. So over here again, a lot of inspections were mandatory for any producer. So you'll be getting inspections from the income tax department, the excise taxation department, environmental department, etc., etc. So a lot of people inspecting, so that was resulting in a lot of corruption, of course, and discouraging the private investment. So these were also reduced. Then we talk about liberalization. Now till 1991, the Indian economy was pretty closed, right? So it was self-centered or inward looking. However, this strategy was not working and India had to liberalize its trade regime. So in order to stop trade, there are two measures that are employed: tariff barriers and non-tariff barriers. So tariff barriers are nothing but imposing very high import duty on the goods that are coming into your economy. And when you talk about non-tariff barriers, these are in the form of quotas, right? So they would be fixing that India can import only, let us say, 100 tons or 100 million tons of steel in a particular year, right? So those are non-tariff barriers. Liberalization implied that these barriers to trade would be removed. Then we talked about privatization. As I said, a large number of industries were privatized or permissions given to the private industry to invest in a lot of industries. And then of course, globalization. India allowed for foreign capital to be coming into the country. So we allowed foreign direct investments as well as foreign institutional investments to be investing in our economy, so that we get more foreign exchange from other resources. So these are certain facts about the latest 5-year plan that is still in operation. 12th 5-year plan, that is from 2012 to 2007. So you will do well to memorize these facts, and these are very important as far as any objective type paper is concerned. Ever since the coming in of the new government in 2014, we have seen a large shift from the earlier planning strategy in the Indian economy. So the Planning Commission has been abolished and has been replaced by a new organization or a body called Niti Aayog. Niti is an acronym or a short form for National Institute for Transforming India. And Niti itself is the Hindi word for policy. So it is nothing but Policy Commission, right? This happened mainly because of conflicts between Planning Commission and the Finance Commission. So Planning Commission was also allocating central funds to state governments, and Finance Commission was also distributing the taxes collected by the center or the shareable pool between the center and the states. So there was an overlapping of functions. However, it was felt that since Finance Commission enjoys constitutional authority, right, so it should be more powerful as compared to Planning Commission. However, Planning Commission, being a non-statutory or non-constitutional body, was enjoying more powers. So that is why Planning Commission was abolished, right? So it is coming back to Niti Aayog. It is a policy think tank of the Government of India. It would recommend the kind of policies that the Government of India should be following. Again, it aims to involve states in economic policy making in India. So it is talking about increasing cooperative federalism, right? So this is nothing but increasing the economic cooperation between the state government and the union government as well, right? It will provide strategic and technical advice to central and state governments. So it will be having a large number of experts which will be specially called in for, let us say, to formulate a policy of science in India, science and technology in India, right? So they would be providing advice to the government. Again, Prime Minister is the ex officio chairperson of the Niti Aayog, and this is same as it was in case of the Planning Commission as well. So the composition, again, this is very important for your objective papers. Prime Minister at the top, Governing Council, which includes all Chief Ministers and Lieutenant Governors or of United UTs, right? Regional councils for specific issues and tenures, right? So if there is a particular region which is having a specific problem, for example, the Northeast states, you can the Niti Aayog would have specific councils for that region, and experts, specialists and practitioners with relevant domain knowledge as special invitees. So if there is any specific problem, right, to solve that problem, specialists from that field might be called in for temporary basis. And also it would have a full-time organizational framework. Okay, before ending this lecture, let us take a look at the final question. So which of the following statements are true in the context of Niti Aayog? First is Sindhu Shri Khullar is the CEO of Niti Aayog. This one is not true because Sindhu Shri Khullar, while she was the first CEO of Niti Aayog, she has been recently replaced because she retired by Amitabh Khan, right? So this statement is wrong. Prime Minister is the ex officio chairperson of Niti Aayog. Now this of course is true. We just saw it in the last slide. Its recommendations are binding on the government. These are not. It is purely a recommendatory body. The government can reject its recommendations. And it will formulate the 5-year plans for India. So this is also not true because that was the job of the Planning Commission. So that brings us to the end of this particular video lecture. Thank you very much.